That's how it happens. And I asked my mom once, I'm like, why didn't you tell the cops about that? Because, I never even considered it. You don't talk to the cops, right? And my dad's a cop, and that's what I was taught. He said, don't talk to the cops. You get arrested, you want a lawyer. End of question. All right, so cognition. And a computer. Computer's like, you've talked too much, I'm not going to work. Okay. Oh. There we go. All right, so cognition is the activity of knowing. Cognition is thinking. How do you know what you know? How do you come to learn something?
Experiences.
Experiences. That is probably the most effective way of coming to know something. If I could take you guys all with me for the next decade, and we could do therapy together, and go and interact with people, God bless you, and people watch and point out things, then you guys would learn all this psychology stuff a lot better.
That would be dope.
Would be dope, yeah. And that is how school used to be done. You used to go live with a teacher, and you traveled with him, you did everything together, like Jesus and his disciples, right? That's why he had disciples, because teachers, or rabbis, would just have students that came and lived with him. And they stayed with him for years until they felt like they had learned enough to move on. So that is the best way to learn something. However, you would have to come and live with me for the next decade. And
On a farm? That's awesome.
right, on a farm would be too bad. I'll have you out mucking cow poop and things like that, collecting chicken eggs. Butchering old chickens, though, would you be up for that?
I've done it in Haiti before.
Oh, yeah, of course you're from here, yeah. Different culture.
Just talking, that's a
Just plucking.
mother, yeah, it's
Do you eat them?
Do I what?
Do you eat them?
Yes, we eat all of our animals. I have some cows that I may be eating rather sooner than later because they're driving me crazy. They won't stay in their pen. Trust me, when you have 2,000-pound animals that get out of their cage consistently, you'll want to eat them too.
Well,
Yeah.
you can't eat all of it though, so what do you do with the rest?
We sell it.
Oh, you do? Okay.
Yeah, we're not like big producers or anything, but we do sell usually to other college teachers or students. So if you ever want to eat. But yeah, I have this great video. I got up early one morning and there's this beautiful sunrise and I'm filming it, and all of a sudden I turn around and this is all on video, and there's a herd of cows running through the desert. I didn't even know you guys were out. Great, glad you're coming back. So, they want their breakfast, they saw me. All right, so how do we know things? Experience is great. We can learn in an official setting like this. But this is education, which may or may not use your cognition. Hopefully my class does activate cognition, the thinking process of the brain. So we learned about intelligence, but cognition is the actual use of intelligence. So intelligence is something that sort of sits there, you have it, but you can use it or you can choose not to use it. In our society, not enough people use it. So how do we think, and how does our thinking process change throughout our lifespan? Because you know that a 5-year-old thinks very differently than a 15-year-old who thinks very differently than a 55-year-old. So the way we think changes. A lot of that has to do with the physical development of the brain, because the brain is not fully developed until post-puberty. So usually, like most scientists agree, somewhere around 20, your brain is fully developed. So the brain is continuing to develop, continuing to have more connections. If you look at a baby brain, there's a lot of neurons with hardly any connections. And so those connections very rapidly begin to develop throughout the toddler years. And then by elementary school, the brain is pretty well developed. And then puberty hits, and the brain goes through a whole frenzy of reconnections and rebuilding itself, which is why teenage years can be a little bit difficult. If you're a teenager, sorry for insulting you, but when you pass teenage years, you'll look back and go, yeah, teenage years were a bit difficult. And don't get me wrong, I think teenagers are super smart and they're fully capable, and we don't give teenagers enough credit, but it is a time of your life when it's more emotional than a lot of other times, and that's because the brain is reconnecting things. Ladies, unfortunately, when you hit menopause, the brain's going to do the same thing, because now instead of all of these hormones, we have a lack of hormones, and now the brain is going to go through all of this rewiring as well. And monthly, sorry to the guys, I'll apologize to you even more, monthly our brain also rewires itself, because our estrogen level spikes, our estrogen level drops. And that's when the hormone levels go up, the brain begins to rewire. When the hormone level goes down, the brain rewires again. Unfortunately, the lack of estrogen part of it is when the brain rewiring is just like, we don't enjoy it quite as much, and we get pissy and moody, and we call that PMS. Some people are worse than others.
Oh, pissy and moody.
Pissy and moody, yeah.
Yum.
Mhm.
Pissy moody syndrome.
Yes, pissy moody syndrome. Now, men also have changes in hormones. There's andropause when they're older. There is a monthly testosterone cycle. Some psychologists want to have irritable male syndrome, IMS. But it is way less dramatic for men than women. Suck men. And so, I mean, great for them, but there is some changes in their hormonal level. It's less time-based, more environmental-based, like spending more time around your wife will decrease your testosterone slightly, which is why a lot of men in good marriages feel like having a wife just sort of calms them down, makes them feel more peaceful. And that's because the testosterone dropped just a little bit, just enough to take that edge off so that they can relax. Because testosterone is really like, it's a tense hormone. It drives you. It's aggressive. And what was that?
Makes you battle ready.
Makes you battle ready, exactly. And so sometimes it's nice to have just a little less of it, which is why men live longer if they're married. Okay? Testosterone shortens your lifespan. Being married lengthens your lifespan. Men are significantly happier if they're married. Don't believe Hollywood that says that single men are the happiest. Women, you're also happier married. Not quite as much as men, but probably because you're doing more housework. But married women are the happiest ones out there. So married people are happier than single. Widowed people are even happier than single. So you're better off having loved than lost than to never have loved at all. That is proven by research. Divorced people are the most miserable, which does not come as a surprise if you are divorced or have parents who divorce. Right? So divorce sucks.
Would that be divorced people who are not remarried, or divorced people who are remarried but
Divorced
have the
people,
experience of being divorced?
Divorced people, period, because most remarriages fail. Every remarriage increases the chance of divorce by another 10%. So first marriage, nowadays it's 50-60% chance of divorce. Second marriage, you've got 70% chance. Third marriage, you're at an 80% chance of divorce. Because you're just taking all that baggage in, and you're remarrying the same exact person in a different body. Because every single time you pick the same person, so you might as well have worked it out with the first one. Or if somebody's worse, usually they downgrade. Every marriage after that is first. Now, of course, there's exceptions to that. Some people are able to make it without any issues. Some people can get married as teenagers and they have a great life. So there's always somebody who breaks the rule, but that doesn't mean that the statistics aren't still there. So as we go through our lifespan, the different stages, whether we're married or not married, whether we have children, whether we are a child or an adult or an elderly person, is all going to change how we think about things. Now, your intelligence level determines the extent of thinking, but it's not the style of thinking. Cognition is the style, the flavor of our intelligence. The two big names we've talked about already, Piaget and Vygotsky, will be getting more in-depth into their theory in this chapter. Especially Piaget. I mean, Vygotsky was important, but Piaget is why we teach the way we teach. Piaget recognized that kids learn differently at different ages and how they think differently. And so we tailored the school system in order to cater to the way kids think. So Piaget would not approve of the fact that we are pushing reading, writing, and arithmetic to kindergartners, because Piaget says that is not how cognition works in the kindergartner mind. And you can't teach something that the person is not capable of learning. So we've moved away from Piaget, and it's causing issues in our educational system. Genetic epistemology is what Piaget really said. He was a genetic epistemologist. And this is epistemology. How do we come to know reality? How do we know the world around us? And he especially wanted to know, how do children come to know and understand the world around you? Now, Piaget looked at environment as well as biology, as well as genetics. So he was one of the really balanced theorists that said, we are genetically programmed to come to know the world according to our age. So we know the world differently depending on our age, and that's genetically based. However, it is our interaction and our experience in the world that helps us to develop. So it is biological, but we can't ignore the fact that we need environmental input in order to develop appropriately. So what he did was he just took these kids into a laboratory setting. He also would observe them in school, but he was most famous for his question and answer technique, where he'd bring them into the lab and he would just ask them things like, what are you seeing? What do you think I'm seeing? Is this bigger or smaller? And I'll show you some of the videos of his questions and answers, which you may have seen. Anybody seen some of these in Psych 101? Okay, a couple of them. Okay, so we'll definitely go through it. So he used these questions to figure out how is the child reasoning through things. So if you ask a 5-year-old how they reason through something, it's going to be very different than an 18-year-old. Piaget defined intelligence as how do we adapt to our environment. So if our environment changes, can we adapt to it appropriately? Which I personally think is probably the best definition of intelligence out there. And that really incorporates so many different aspects of intelligence, whether it's music or reading or nature or whatever it is. Can you adapt to the changes in your environment? And he also said that we have schemes or cognitive structures. You probably remember the word schema from Psych 101. So these are frameworks that we have about certain ideas. So if I asked you what your schema was about gender. So ladies, what is your schema about men? Describe men.
Masculine.
Masculine.
Full of testosterone.
Full of testosterone.
Just
And what is,
learned that one.
yeah. What else?
Mechanical.
Mechanical, so mechanically inclined, like be able to fix things. Okay.
Providers.
Providers. Anything else?
They usually have a penis.
Usually have a piece. Okay, yes. We'll go with that. That is true. We've had positive comments so far. I usually have a lot of students who have negative comments about men too. But we do have positive and negative schema, right? And I think, unfortunately, in our society right now, we have a lot of negative towards men, which is not helpful. And our schema has sort of changed with negativity, right? We're more negative towards men nowadays. 50 years ago, we would have been more negative towards women. And if you go back through society, there's so many different schemas. For instance, in ancient Rome, men were believed to be the only ones truly capable of love. Women were too shallow to understand love. Interesting. Huh? Although it doesn't matter what time period you go back into, women were always using sex to control men. So there was a situation in Rome where they wanted the Senate to vote a certain way, and so all the wives got together and said, none of us will have sex with our husbands until they make this vote. And they stuck to it, and they got
That's
their
the
vote.
only power they had then.
Yeah.
So.
Interesting, huh? All right, so we all have these values. Some of you have very positive values towards men. Some of you have negative values towards men. And guys, the same for women. I worked in a domestic violence clinic for many, many years with batterers. And so I have heard very negative schemas towards women. So we develop these schemas through our life experience. Okay? Most scientists would say we're not born with a schema. We're not born with attitudes or values towards something. Now, maybe basic, like we may be more likely to be afraid of something. We're more genetically sensitive. So fear or enjoyment, things like that may be genetically programmed. But most of our schema comes through our experience and interaction with the world. And we're adding things to this framework all the time. So if you have a good experience with somebody of the opposite sex, you add something positive. If you have a bad experience, you add something negative to it. And then whatever the overall idea or overall framework is, determines how you interact with somebody of the opposite gender. If you've been raped, then you're going to have a really bad schema towards the opposite sex, okay? Which, by the way, could happen with either one. One of my past co-therapists, he used to work as a therapist in the prison system, and he had a patient, a prisoner client, who he was in prison for raping 2 men at the same time. At the same time, yeah. I mean, he didn't physically rape them at the same time, but he had them both. He held one down while he raped. He was a very big guy. He was like 7 feet tall, 400 pounds, huge man. And and he held 2 men down and proceeded to rape both of them. That was what he was in prison for. Yeah. So you can imagine what those men's attitudes were after that. So Piaget said we are active creators of our own intelligence. We change the environment, even as babies. He believed babies decided things about their environment. They decided what toys to play with. They decided what goals to make. I want to get to this toy over here. How am I going to navigate to get over to there? I may have to knock down a wall of blocks to get to it. Or I may need to figure out how to manipulate mom and dad to give me this thing that's above my reach. And so we are creators of our own environment, even at a young age. He was not on the passive side of development. He believed we were very active in how we developed. So even though he did believe biology played a role, that our activity was very important in our cognition. He also looked at something called organization, where we have these basic schemas, and as we experience life, we add new schemas to it. We develop past schemas, and so in our brain, we organize these schemas into more and more complex ideas. So for instance, as a child, you may have an idea about men, because you have a dad. You have this idea of men, but then you meet other men, and now you have to organize that schema into it. Or you watch TV, and so you develop all these schemas that have to be combined. Or maybe you meet somebody of the opposite, or of a different race. Opposite race, don't know what an opposite race is. But you meet somebody of a different race, and now you have to maybe make a new schema. Or maybe you heard about that race, maybe you're growing up in a racist household where you hear a lot of negativity, and then you actually meet that person growing up, and now you have one schema that may be contradicting with a new schema that you're developing. I've been told these bad things, and yet I have a great experience with this person. That takes a lot of neural flexibility and a lot of detaching and reattaching neurons. So it's really an amazing physiological process. And especially, we're talking about little kids going through all of this complex cognition, although not always little kids. First person I ever met from Denmark, he came and volunteered at our ranch, and one of the first things he says, "I'm so excited, I saw black people." And I was like, "What? You can't say that. You're not from Denmark. Everybody's white there. I've never seen a black person." I said, "How is that?" If you're in like Copenhagen, the major city, there would be people of different races. But he was, when you went to Denmark, you never saw a black person. Yeah. So, and he had never seen a black person.
And can I say, my friend went to China, and she said I was like a rock star in China. She said everyone wanted a picture with me. Everybody was trying to give me something and take pictures with me, and she said it was crazy, and I had to stay in my hotel room, for a couple of days just to get away from the paparazzi of the Chinese people who were just fascinated by the fact that they had never seen a black person. Yeah, it seems so weird to us because America is so diverse, and California is really diverse. It's a strange. And then of course he flew into LAX, so the first black people he meets are like the super ghetto TSA. They're like the ones I can't wait when I get back from Europe. Yes, trying to be some super ghetto LA person. I love it. But yeah, he did too, luckily. But he's like, "I'm so excited. Please don't say that again. I'm gonna get shot here or something." But it's so weird. So he's seen movies and TV shows and heard things. So he had this sort of schema that had been given to him through the rest of the world, and then he had to develop his new schema. So he had a stereotype schema.
He had a stereotype, which, I mean, it's Denmark, so they tend to think positively about everybody. So luckily it was a positive schema. I tried to naivete his schema. That's not a word, but I think his schema was too positive. Everybody's wonderful. Yeah, I was, when I came out from LAX, there was this guy who said, he broke down and he needed gas money, and he said he'd send it back to me in Denmark if I let him borrow it. So he gave him $20 and let him take down all of his information on his driver's license. And
You'll never see it again.
No. So yeah, his schema was a little too positive.
Did you ever hear from him? Did he get it back? I'm
He
just
did not
wondering.
get it back. No, I'm so friendly, and he did not get it back. Yeah.